Is Daenerys the stallion who mounts the world? At first, some of you might think that this is a stupid question. Rhaego was the stallion who mounts the world, and Mirri Maz Duur killed him, or at least prevented his birth, thus preventing that prophecy from coming true. But that's the thing about a Song of Ice and Fire prophecy. It always comes true. From Renly's ghost, to the girl on the grey horse, or the sea coming to Winterfell, it always comes true. It's just sometimes misinterpreted. So if the Stallion prophecy must be true, does Daenerys fit it? Well, there are two prophecies surrounding the Stallion. An ancient prophecy passed down through the Dothraki culture, and a newer prophecy given by the Dosh Khaleen. I will examine how well Daenerys fits into both of them. But first, we need a quick overview of how prophecy works in the A Song of Ice and Fire universe. Almost all prophecies are given visually. These visuals are then told to the greater masses, either by the viewer interpreting them, as is the case with Melisandre, or by the viewer telling the people exactly what they saw, as is the case with Jojen. While there are some who believe that a prophecy can be avoided, like with Stannis and the prophecy of Renly defeating him, they do appear to always come true in the end. Thus, smarter prophets try to guide the prophecy into occurring in a way that is advantageous to themselves, like with Daeron and the dead dragon. With that understanding, we can now move on to the Crone's prophecy. As the smoke ascended, the chanting died away, as the ancient Crone closed her single eye. I have seen his face, and heard the thunder of his hooves. As swift as the wind he rides, and behind him his calisar covers the earth. Men without number, with arcs shining in their hands, like blades of razor grass. Fierce as a storm this prince will be. His enemies will tremble before him, and their wives will weep tears of blood and rend their flesh with grief. The bells in his hair will sing his coming, and milkmen in their stone tents will fear his name. This is the prophecy told by the Dosh Khaleen in Vaes Dothrak, describing the stallion that mounts the world. It can be broken down into 9 components. I contend that Daenerys is the only person that fits all 9 predictions. So, let's go through each of the predictions from the most generalized prediction to the most specific to see who they could apply to. We'll start with his enemies will tremble before him. This is very broad and only narrows our prediction down to anyone who is either a great warrior or has a powerful army. This narrows the stallion down to practically any leader who uses military means to achieve their goals. This includes Daenerys. Next, we can look at the 2 prophecies, the bells in his hair will sing of his coming, and behind him his calisar covers the earth, men without numbers, with arcs shining in their hands. These show that the stallion will follow the Dothraki tradition of having bells in their hair, and will have a very large army with Dothraki in it. Both of these are things that Daenerys does, but so does every other Dothraki leader. So we have narrowed the prediction down to any culturally Dothraki leader. In the same vein as these 2 predictions, we have the prediction, I have seen his face. While at first this appears to be the Crone stating she has seen a vision of the future, it could also be taken literally, being that the Crone has seen the face of the stallion already, which also fits with Daenerys, but also still almost every other Dothraki leader. The next 2 predictions are interesting, as at first glance they appear to be very general, but when you dig more deeply, they talk about the stallion in ways most only talk about Daenerys. The first of these is, as swift as the wind he rides. This could just mean that the stallion is a great rider, which most Dothraki are. However, Daenerys specifically states that the first time she rides her silver, that Khal Drogo has given me the wind. On top of this, Daenerys also rides Drogon, a dragon who is travelling much more swiftly and much more wind-like than any Dothraki horse, showing that the prediction is slightly more tailored to Daenerys than any other Dothraki. The same goes for the next prediction, being that the stallion is as fierce as a storm. While all Dothraki leaders are definitely fierce, none of them are described as storm-like. The only people in the story that are referred to as a storm are the sellswords, the Stormcrows, the Storm Lords of Westeros, and Daenerys Targaryen, the Stormborn. So our prophecy still tells of a Dothraki leader with strong hints towards Daenerys. Now we can get into the predictions that start rapidly narrowing down the candidates. Throughout the prophecy, the stallion is referred to as a prince, meaning that the stallion must come from royal blood. eliminating all the Dothraki leaders that fought their way up through the hierarchy from more humble beginnings. So now our prophecy predicts of a Dothraki leader of royal birth with strong hints towards Daenerys. The penultimate prophecy is that the milkmen in stone tents will fear his name. Now milkmen is what Dothraki call people with white skin, and of them there are two groups, the Qartheen and the Westerosi. But which of these groups could be said to live in stone tents? While the Qartheen primarily use brick and wood to build their houses, they do use a little marble in their larger palaces, which is a type of stone. But I would say that a stone tent would much more likely refer to a Westerosi castle. So the milkmen in their stone tents would refer to the Lords of Westeros. Now the Lords of Westeros don't care at all about the Dothraki, or even know, let alone fear, one of their leaders' names. Because A, they won't cross the narrow sea, and B, as Jorah tells us, they aren't able to storm even a weak castle. However, there is one Dothraki leader they fear. Not just fear, but they fear the very name Targaryen, which narrows the prophecy down to just Daenerys Targaryen. And for the cherry on top, we have the final prediction. Their wives will weep tears of blood and rend their flesh in grief. While at first you may be mistaken for thinking this is just the Crones adding a bit of dramatic flair to the prophecy, this actually happens to the wife of one of Daenerys' main enemies. Who are Daenerys' primary enemies? Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark. How does Eddard Stark's wife die? By clawing at her own face in grief, rending her flesh, as the white tears and the red ones ran together until her face was torn and tattered, thus fulfilling the final piece of the Dosh Khalen's prophecy. But while Daenerys clearly seems to be the only person that could be the stallion this Dosh Khaleen predicted, she is not the only one to make a stallion who mounts the world's prophecy. So let's see how Daenerys stacks up with the ancient and original prophecy of the stallion who mounts the world. The classical prophecy differs somewhat from the Crone's prophecy, as while the Crone's prophecy is filled with predictions that Daenerys has fulfilled, the classical prophecy is primarily made up of predictions that Daenerys has not yet fulfilled but plans to do so. This prophecy is also told to us in pieces by three different people. The first person who tells us of the prophecy is Jorah Mormont, with small expansions being told to us by Khal Drogo and Mirri Maz Duur. Jorah Mormont gives us the most complete picture of the prophecy. As Jorah puts it, it's an ancient prophecy of the Dothraki that contains 4 predictions. First, the stallion is the Khal of Khals. Second, he will unite the Dothraki into a single Khalasar. Third, he will ride to the ends of the earth. And fourth, all the people of the world will be his herd. So let's start going through these predictions, starting with the part that has already come true. That being that he will ride to the ends of the earth. Now, as a nomadic horse-based culture, the Dothraki meaning of the word earth doesn't mean whole planet as we know it. As Drogo tells us, the earth ends at the Black Salt Sea. So when the Dothraki say the ends of the earth, they mean where the ground meets the sea, which is what we know as a continent. This is also supported by the fact that the Dothraki don't like to travel on the ocean to the point where their language doesn't even have a word for ship. So with this in mind, we can see that Daenerys has already fulfilled this prophecy, and is the only Dothraki leader to do so, as Daenerys has already travelled to the ends of the continent. In her childhood, she grew up in Braavos, while at the end of A Clash of Kings, she travels to Qarth and boards a ship, thus travelling to the ends of the earth and completing the 3rd prophecy. Now, while Daenerys hasn't fulfilled the other 3 prophecies yet as the books are incomplete, her goals and their probable outcomes do line up with her fulfilling them. Also, before I go any further, just a quick aside. In this analysis, while I am primarily looking at the books that have been released, I will just mention here that while not all of these prophecies have come true for Daenerys yet, they all did come true in the show. With that out of the way, first we will look at the prediction he will unite the Dothraki into a single Khalasar. This does seem to be the direction Daenerys is heading, as she ended A Dance with Dragons encountering Khal Draco's Khalasar. Whilst thinking, to go forward I must go back, which is from Quaith's prophecy, but we don't have time to get into that right now. All we need to know right now is that this prophecy, along with the undying vision of Daenerys of, beneath the mother of the mountains, a line of naked crones crept from a great lake and knelt shivering before her, their grey heads bowed, show us that Daenerys is probably going to be going back to Vaes Dothrak, and she is probably going to conquer the Dothraki, thus uniting them into a single Khalasar just in a way the Dothraki didn't expect. Also, it's such a George R. R. Martin thing to do to have a nation of marauders who are only known for the destruction they bring, to have a revered prophecy of them conquering the world, which actually turns out to be a prophecy of them being conquered and being brought under the thumb of a foreign dictator. Secondly, we will look at the prediction, the Stallion is the Khal of Khals. Now at first, this appears to be the same as the first prediction, as if you have united all the Dothraki under you, you will naturally be the Khal of Khals. However, we can see from Viserys' various nicknames, of the Sawfoot King, Khal Rhaemar, and the Cart King, Khal Rhaegar, that the word Khal is meant to mean monarch rather than specifically the leader of a Dothraki Khalasar. We can also see that through her planned conquest of the Seven Kingdoms, Daenerys plans to bring many monarchs, or at least the descendants of monarchs, under her control. So that the Khal of Khals does not necessarily mean the king of the Dothraki Khals, but in Daenerys' case, the king of the kings of the Seven Kingdoms, but also along with the possibility of Khals, see the previous section. Next we will look at the fourth prediction, all the people of the world will be his herd. This is another prediction that makes the previous two seem redundant on first glance, as if all of the world is his herd, then of course he will unite the Dothraki into a single Khalasar, and he will be the Khal of Khals. So that must mean either the prophecy has 4 predictions and 2 of them are redundant, or there is meant to be a different interpretation to this prediction. As I see it, there are 2 possible explanations for this. Explanation the first, we take the people of the world to mean the people of the continent, using the reasoning that the Dothraki word is unclear. This means that Daenerys would only have to conquer a continent, which she plans to do so by conquering Westeros. Explanation the second, all the people of the world doesn't mean every single person in the world, but rather that there exists a person from each group that would follow Daenerys. This is something Daenerys has done as far back as Astapor, as they had slaves from all corners of the world who once they were freed decided to follow her. So as we can see, Daenerys has either completed, or is on track to completing, all of the predictions that Jorah has told us about from the classical prophecy. But this isn't where the classical prophecy ends. While these 4 predictions are what Jorah tells Daenerys about the prophecy in his brief overview, both Drogo and Mirri Maz Duur talk about even more predictions to the prophecy. Drogo states that the Stallion will have all the lands of the earth to rule. Once again, if we follow the rule that the Dothraki word for earth means continent, then this could be referring to the future conquest of Westeros. And Mirri's predictions are even more interesting. She states that the Stallion will burn cities and trample nations into the dust, which Daenerys has already done both of. While taking Astapor, she loosed her dragons on the city, thus burning it. And if we use the Oxford Dictionary's definition of a nation being a large group of people united by common descent, history, culture, or language inhabiting a particular country or territory, then Daenerys dismantling the nations of Slavers Bay, which are often described as dusty, through her conquest and forcing a new culture upon the occupants would be considered trampling nations into the dust. So we have seen how Daenerys has completed all of the predictions of the Crone's prophecy, and how her goals and likely actions for the next books line up with the classical prophecy. But maybe that's not enough for you. Maybe you need confirmation from someone in-universe. And to that we look to the actions of Mirri Maz Duur. Mirri Maz Duur is an interesting character, but also one that has a few gaps in her story. So I'll try to fill them in as logically as I can. Mirri Maz Duur travelled to Asshai to learn different magical and medicinal arts from all sorts of cultures, from the Dothraki to the Maesters. However, she doesn't do this for power or glory, as her real calling was to help her own people, the Lazarene. She returned to her own people to help heal them and protect them. Now, we do know that she knows of the prophecy of the Stallion who mounts the world, so it could be assumed that she thinks the best way for her to protect her people is to prevent the prophecy from coming true. When Khal Ogo attacks her village, she would hear of the pregnant Khaleesi who will give birth to the Stallion. She realizes that she must stop this at any cost. As Daenerys enters her village, she puts her plan into action. Seizing upon opportunities that present themselves, she kills Drogo and Daenerys' unborn baby. After she does this, she seems quite content with herself, thinking that she has just saved her people, accepting her fate that she is to die horribly. But it is at this point that it appears as though Mirri Maz Duur starts to believe that it could be Daenerys who's the Stallion, as this is the point that Daenerys reveals that she will not return to take her place amongst the Doshkaleen, but rather rule her own Khalasar. And she also shows that she has a darker, more vengeful side. After ordering Mirri to be bound to Drogo's funeral pyre, Mirri switches from having contempt to Daenerys and her Khalasar to fear. Now, my interpretation as to why her mood changes in this moment is that she realizes in her efforts to prevent the creation of the Stallion who mounts the world, she has inadvertently created him, as she seemed quite content in receiving whatever punishment the Dothraki had in store for her, so long as she could stop the Stallion from being born. There is, however, one small hair in the soup with this theory. That being that every single version of the prophecy, including the name of the prophecy itself, refers to the Stallion who mounts the world as a man. However, if we look back to what I said at the start of the video, and remember that prophecies are given in visions and are later spoken of or written down, then we realize that the name of the prophecy wasn't an original part of the vision. So that could be flavor added by later generations of Dothraki. And the prophecy is talking about the head of a Khalasar. And up until this point, every head of a Khalasar has been male. In fact, prophecies tend to use this type of symbolism a lot. Raiders from the sea are represented by the sea itself. A Stark King is represented as a king with a wolf's head. So it's not too much of a stretch to think that the representation of the head of a Khalasar would be a Khal, rather than the singular instance where it is a Khaleesi. With that being said, everything else fits. Only Daenerys fits with all of the Crone's prophecies, and the classical prophecy lines up with her goals. And Mirri Maz Duur acts as though she fears Daenerys has become the very thing she sought to destroy. But what do you think? Is Daenerys becoming the Stallion who will mount the world? Or is this the one instance of a prophecy actually being prevented? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Until next time, bye.